Smart 24, driving business.
Good morning, Smart 24 TV, and welcome to, of course, our live discussion series on COP28. We want to educate whoever is out there on what they need to know about COP28 and climate action. We shall be discussing a topic of global significance, global importance, and I'm your host, Oyeste Clinton Liberty, and I'm delighted to have with us a distinguished guest who is going to give us, of course, a very different perspective, a different angle on what COP28 is, and this is none other than Penny Nambabazi, the Trade and Investment Analyst at the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute, which we know as CIATIN in Uganda. You're most welcome. To our audience, we are diving into a crucial theme tonight, which we call the road to COP28. Everything one needs to know about COP28, or what we call the 28th Conference of the Parties. It is a pivotal event that, of course, addresses global climate challenges. And, of course, we are going to begin our discussion today by understanding what COP28 is all about. Penny Nambabazi is our guest for today, as I already mentioned, and she's from CIATIN, and she's going to enlighten us on what could be the significance of COP28 and what it aims to achieve. Penny Nambabazi, you're most welcome to Smart 24 TV.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a very cold morning, and of course, it's also a climate crisis, of course, that we are going through, and that comes in handy, to have you on board. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I think to dive into this discussion, let us start by you telling us what COP28 is and what could be the significance of COP28.
Okay. So COP28, of course, originally started from the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And during the annual summit, the 21st annual summit, it established the Paris Agreement, which Paris Agreement is binding international treaty on climate change. And the COP mainly addresses most of the areas of climate action measures that 196 countries being party to the Paris Agreement, but also party to the UNFCCC. So that discussion is what usually translates into the Conference of Parties, which this year will be the 28th Conference of Parties, and it will be happening in Dubai. The main focus really is to see to it that countries, really to see how far countries are doing with climate action measures, but also the areas of concern that the COP addresses, which is around the mitigation and adaptation on climate change, and also the areas that the Paris Agreement ideally was mainly focusing to address, which was to establish a framework that was mainly used to look at issues around technology, financing, how to exactly support the developing countries, those that needed support to address climate change. So the COP would really be looking at having a stock take really on the areas that should have been addressed in the last COP 27. Yes, so mainly it's trying to look and see what have countries been able to address.
That's true.
In the COP27, the main areas were to see to it that countries were looking to mitigate their mitigation and adaptation on climate change, but also the areas of focus, given that now we are trying to also transition, and that being that there are greenhouse gas emissions that had increased, and how best that they could be able to address them, given also the different measures that a number of countries were taking in, given that all countries decided to have nationally determined contributions, NDCs, that are supposed to look at fostering climate change and adaptation.
That's
measures.
right. No, actually, I think to me you have, try to break down exactly what COP28 is. And to me, of course, I've always known it as an international gathering, of course, where nations come together to discuss those critical negotiation actions and actually to combat climate change, and also, of course, those environmental key policies that could be set by different nations. And of course, we're going to look at what could be those outcomes from the previous COPs. But I know that the road to COP28 has actually now paved way for different outcomes, and that is why now we are going to see countries go to COP to ensure that they are able to negotiate for what the country wants to see. And we also know that different countries have come up with their indices, and we know that now countries will be going there to ensure that they give a report on what progress has been made from different indices. So I understand with COP coming through, we know that each conference builds on the achievements and challenges of the past, setting the stage for a good stage for the more ambitious and effective climate action. So to me, I think COP28 is going to be a very big international conference that is going to, of course, have different outcomes. But of course, we also understand this year is going to be a very special COP. Why? Because I think this COP is going to be the first one where we're going to have the first global stocktake. And I think to me that's very important for countries to be a part of that. And it's also important for them to see how best can they incorporate that into their indices. So I think to me, when you talk about COP28 being very pivotal for countries, I think to me that's very important. And you also mentioned the different topics that COP28 will cover, and of course you mentioned the emission reduction targets. That is something that COP28 will be looking at. It will also look at what could be those innovative adaptation strategies that would be also important to also even the financial commitments. I think was it in COP27 we had we demanded to know what is the definition of climate finance, and up to now I think it is something that people or countries want defined. So financial commitments to support developing nations, especially the LDCs, I think to me that would be a very another topic that will be covered. And of course issues concerning technology development and transfer will also be a very critical issue. And of course capacity building, we cannot leave out capacity building. We have been actually talking about the issue of gender and climate change, and I think to me that will also be another issue that will be unleashed while at COP28. So I think to me there is quite a number of topics that are going to be of course revealed at COP28. But as we go on, we want to understand the history of COP and what, we have had several COPs going on, from COP1, which was in Berlin. I think that was in 1995. That's when we had the first COP, which laid groundwork for the UNFCCC to establish the Berlin mandate. And of course, this outlined the commitment to negotiate legally binding emission reduction targets for least development countries. Even all these topics that we are talking about, I think have been from COP1, the groundwork has been laid. So to me, I want us to have a small discussion, Penina, on the brief history of the previous COP meetings and the key outcomes. Just key outcomes. We don't want to delve into all those outcomes, but what are those key outcomes that we are missing out?
Okay, from the previous COPs, of course, as you've already also mentioned, there are particular areas that countries sat down to agree to. Financing was one of them. And it was stated that under the Paris Agreement that countries, developed nations or countries would be able to assist developing countries in contributing towards financing, towards climate change, and also technology as well. And of course, given the challenges that we have seen over time, is that most of those developed countries have not been able to actually meet that commitment. And this has come back to now to the developing nations to find ways of strategizing by either having their own homegrown solutions to climate change, but also seeing to it that they can be able to support themselves. And we know there have been so many challenges when it comes to that, because for most of the developing countries, they have faced a lot of challenges with financing, being indebted, having less money to be able to support.
What was the target? I think there was a financial target. Was it 100 billion?
Yes,
it was 100 billion.
So that target was not has not been fully committed by most of the developed nations. So the challenges that are facing most of these developing countries really are known really when it comes to debt. Most of them are highly indebted, but also when it comes to even trying to generate their own local resources, most of which has not really been streamlined or targeted towards climate change. So you find the issues that have been still coming back to the COP is that while the countries agreed, most of these countries, the 196 countries, including those that were developing, had agreed to having nationally determined contributions, which ideally are meant to have most of their resources being channeled to meeting climate change, but that's also true. Policies when it comes to trying to see what measures and responsibilities they can take on as themselves. So that was also one of the areas that we see that they have had challenges now, given that now as we reach the COP28, most of that global stock tech is going to analyze or share a report from the NDCs. And already now from what has been shared in different areas in regards to the COP, as on the road to the COP, they of course have mentioned issues to do with still countries lacking behind their NDCs. Also challenges to do with financing, climate financing still an issue. But also now given that we are trying to now transit, and that transition, how does it look like for most countries? Because we do know that a number of countries are at different economic levels, and most of them are still having their own challenges aside climate change. Now climate change has really also escalated a number of issues, given that most of them have failed to be able to address it, but also policies in place are not really coherent to seeing to it that climate change is still put at the center, can be put at the center of most of these discussions. So the COP28 is going to really shape most of the outcomes to see to it that, hoping that we can be able to see to it that most of these challenges that they are faced now are trying to be addressed, but mainly from the global stock tech. What exactly has been the progress so far? And that report is going to be able to share with us how far countries are doing with climate change.
Amazing, because I don't know, I'm just going to ask this question, Penina. Have you attended COP before? And I don't know, it doesn't have to be the last one, I don't know. Is there any COP you have attended before?
So far, this will be the first. Most likely.
If you attend COP28, it will be the first.
It will be the first.
Amazing.
We have taken keen interest as Siatini to be able to, of course, make sure that we are able to also be part of those discussions, whether it is virtually, in times where we have been able to prepare in time by having pre-COP meetings, which we had last week as well, when it was looking at the road to COP28 and around the transition, but also climate change. What do we have to do in time to be able to prepare as a country, and also being part of a number of climate action networks and organizations that have similar interests in trying to see to it that we can be able to address climate change and amidst the growing elements that keep coming up even now. Yes,
that's true, and we definitely appreciate Siatin, for coming through to join us on such a significant topic and theme. And I think to us, of course, we have high expectations from COP28, but of course, we, as I say, these conferences normally build from the achievements and challenges from the past previous COP meetings, and of course, you had given us a very good background or history of what the COPs have been discussing over the years. But maybe if I could start with COP15, which was in Copenhagen, and I think in 2009, where, of course, despite all the high expectations countries had, COP15 did not produce a legally binding agreement. That was one. And of course, instead, the Copenhagen, of course, accord, there is what they call the Copenhagen Accord, which was reached at that time. And of course, a political agreement that outlined voluntary emission reduction commitment. commitments, and I think that's what happened. That was the key outcome in COP15. In COP17, which was in Durban in 2011, of course, the Durban platform for enhanced action was adopted, and of course, they set a timeline for the negotiation of a new comprehensive climate agreement by 2015, and that would be applicable to all countries. On COP21, which was in Paris in 2015, the Paris Agreement then was adopted, which of course now most countries are adapting to, and this represented a landmark moment in international climate efforts. Countries agreed to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And when it comes to COP22, which was in Marrakech in 2016, of course, they reaffirmed the commitment of the international community to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and they called for increased efforts to address climate change. COP24 was in Katowice. Is it Katowice? I don't know how I have to pronounce this, but Katowice in 2018. Katowice was, of course, a climate package which was, of course, adopted, finalized by the rule book of the implementation, and of course, they also addressed issues related to transparency. They also talked about issues related to mitigation, issues related to adaptation and support. In Madrid, we went there for COP25, and of course, we focused on resolving issues related to Article 6 to the Paris Agreement, and of course, this dealt with those market mechanisms for emission reductions, for mitigation, but at the same time, they also focused on issues to deal with climate change. And then COP26, Glasgow, that was 2021. And of course, that's where they aim to address, of course, the issue of climate finance, and also they also now brought in the rules to carbon markets. So I think, to me, if you look at all these previous meetings we have had, I think it is now best that we have COP28. And of course, we are now going there with, of course, different expectations, high at the same time, but I also believe that we should be able to get now, tangible action points from this conference meeting. So I think, to me, I think that should be a brief history of the COPs, and of course now we're going for COP28. I do not know what key outcome would you want to see, Penina? Key outcome, just like 201, what are those key outcomes you'd want to see?
Well, there are quite a number, but especially towards what we are trying to see to it as Siatini, is that we have just an inclusive transition, not only for Uganda, but also for Africa globally as a continent. And of course, the issues that we have seen coming now is that, as you mentioned, carbon markets. Now more than ever, countries have also established a number of their own carbon neutral strategies and policies, where they're trying to work around how best they're going to be able to transition, also on around the greenhouse gas emissions, curbing that. So there's a need for us to see to it that it is inclusive, but also as Africa, we're able to see to it that we can have a number of these areas, like the transition, be able to foster Africa's development and aspirations. And that has not come forth in a number of different discussions. So being that right now Africa is really in a position where it has always been really at a position where countries are looking at what will Africa do towards this discussion when it comes to the transition, but also around climate change. So currently we know that so many countries have utilized a number of raw materials, access to raw materials or critical raw materials and minerals to see to it that they're able to build onto their industries, their production, and which has not really been the case for most of these developing countries in Africa. So given the fact that we should utilize our industries, build onto making them competitive, but also value chain, value addition in this production discussion is also important. So the transition would ideally be a way for us as Africa to be able to utilize it to also foster our transition. Because we are seeing most of these critical materials could also be able to enforce our side of transition, but also see to it that we're able to utilize the advantage that we have as Africa, being that most of the different developed countries have been utilizing this approach of accessing raw materials. So we are looking at really the COP seeing to it that we can have an inclusive and just transition, but also around the climate change issues when it comes to commitments that were made by the developed countries on supporting developing countries. There needs to be a way that this needs to be also binding to them. We know that it was made to be volunteer. So when it is more of a volunteer approach, less is really put for them to really commit. So there is need to see to it that we have also come a long way to think that we can be able to address our own issues, but we need that support from them. And also building on to technology development. We need it really at a crucial time right now that we should be able to shape.
Actually, sorry to cut you short. Very sorry to cut you short. On technology development, I was actually having a discussion with one of my friends, and I was telling them when it comes to technology development, what we should be actually negotiating for is support towards research and development. Because very many young people are actually into that. They're into research. They're coming up with different innovations, different startups, all along the climate change space. But we still don't have, actually, we're actually having a discussion of if we could actually negotiate for a special funding towards technology, because there should be a special fund for technology development and transfer. So I think, to me, what I wanted to just cut into your submission is that, is it possible for us to actually be supported right away from the point of research and development?
I believe that it's possible. I think the only issue is that, again, we have to be at a position where we're able to also address our own challenges. So unfortunately, we end up having to find ways of committing other developed countries to support ours. But when it comes to aspect of technology, there can be a way for us to also foster that in our policies. When it comes to technology transfer, we need to be very keen to seeing to it that we can be able to have investors or a number of these projects be able to also share this technology, but also build on that, developing our own technology as well. So research and development is really important, because we need to also see to it that we are utilizing the different efforts that have been placed before in regards to either harmonizing our policies, making them more coherent, and also easy for us to be able to ensure that we're able to have more of that contributing to our development and also structural transformation. So we need it very much in this COP28.
Great. So is it okay if we narrow this conversation to Uganda? We would like to definitely now review some of our goals as Uganda. Coming, of course, as we are gearing up for this conference. Let's review some of the current global climate goals. We could actually talk about those that, of course, Uganda is looking at, particularly as a country, but also those global climate goals, so that our audience can understand what it means for us to attend conference. Because someone may say, why are parties attending? And because there are goals to be achieved. There are goals to ensure that we achieve. So let's delve into some of the global climate goals. I think I'll start, and one of the ones I can start with are the temperature targets. I think the overarching goal is to limit the increase in global average of the temperature, and we want to go as well as below 2 degrees Celsius. And if we can do that, then I think, to me, we shall have attained our global climate goal. And we want to do this by pursuing efforts to ensure that we limit the temperatures. Of course, there are so many ways of how we can do this. Of course, we have now the planting of trees campaign, which is going on to ensure that we increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, of course, pre-industrial levels, of course. So I think, to me, the temperature target is one of the global climate goals that whenever we go there, we go to ensure that we achieve. Is any other that you can think about?
Yes, also the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
That's right.
Being that right now, given the fact that so many countries those that have been developed have really taken on industrialization, and that has increased the greenhouse gas emissions, but also as a country and different countries in Africa, generally Africa has also been contributing to those greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why most of the targets right now are also looking at how to decarbonize have decarbonization strategies or goals for most of the countries that are heavily contributing to these gas emissions. But of course, this definitely impacts all of us because we are still looking at, most of these discussions are being looked at as a one-size-fits-all. So even for Africa inclusive, given that we may not be contributing the biggest share, we are still being made to also attain low greenhouse gas emissions. So it's part of the targets and also climate change ambitions.
Perfect. Actually, and as well, of course, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the global stock take. Every country, every nation is excited about this. They want to know what it's going to mean for different countries to because initially this is supposed to happen after 5 years. And now it's going to actually happen. So the agreement, of course, the Paris Agreement includes a mechanism for a global stock take after 5 years, and this is definitely to assess the collective progress towards the goals. And this year we shall be having the first global stock take. And I think to me that's the elephant in the room. Everyone is waiting to see what is actually going to be unleashed when it comes to global stock take. Then the other target, of course, is the national determined contributions, the NDCs, and of course parties to the Paris Agreement are required to submit nationally determined, of course, contributions, and where, of course, they outline their national targets and, of course, strategies to address climate change. And countries are always encouraged to enhance, of course, their commitments over time. And I think this year, I think towards this discussion series, we shall be able to, unleash some of those NDC's action points that we have done for this year. I think adaptation and loss and damage. I don't know, those two. By the way, I think I could use this opportunity to also find out this from you. Adaptation and loss and damage. The two, are they different thematic areas, or it's a thematic area that can be merged together?
So adaptation was actually, it has really been there already. Climate adaptation was one of the areas in adapting to the adverse effects of climate change. Now for loss and damage, in the last COP27, they established a fund on loss and damage. Now the two have not been put together, but they are separately trying to address mainly what countries may have to go through, especially those that are facing a lot of climate crises. When it comes to so many that have been challenged in trying to see to it that they're able to have like a compensation mechanism when it comes to the loss and areas of where damage has also been seen in most countries. They try to advocate and push for a loss and damage fund. So that has also been part of the discussion going forward. And now it's time to look and really see how also best countries have been able to have their contribution towards that, but also whether there has been so much that has been taken on in mitigation. Now climate mitigation is really now on the steps that countries are trying to do to mitigate the issues around it. So the three really are those, they really do seek to the same driving area, which is still on climate change and trying to meet around the ambitious or at least plans that countries have to carry out climate adaptation on the effects of climate change, but also around the loss and damage, which is still just a component of that as well. What exactly has also been faced by most countries in trying to mitigate these issues around climate.
Absolutely, and I think since you have, of course, delved into that, the other one would be technology, which of course you already mentioned, of course, and the agreement promotes the transfer of environmentally sound technologies and the building of capacity in development countries to ensure that we address climate change. And I think to me that is the other area. I think the other global. Have we forgotten any other global goal, climate goal? I think the other one is the global cooperation. I think the Paris Agreement emphasized the need for international cooperation to combat climate change effectively. And it's very important to note that the effectiveness of the Paris Agreement depends on the commitment and actions of individual countries. And I think to me that's why we have the NDCs in place. So I think to me those could be the global climate goals that we have pointed out there. I don't know if we have forgotten any. What about the long-term goal? What is a long-term goal? Because there is one that is long-term, and I think the long-term one is where they try to achieve a balance of emissions to ensure that they sink all greenhouse gases in the second half of this century. So if we could do that, and as I said, of course, the temperature target also comes in. If we could do that, and I think that we'll have achieved the long-term goal. But of course, we haven't seen any country yet to achieve that goal at the moment. So I think, and maybe the other goal, maybe you can share with us on this one, the financial support could be also another goal that we didn't mention. I think where developed countries are committed to provide some financial support to the least developed countries, and I think if they can assist them in issues concerning mitigation activities, issues concerning adaptation, to me that would be very vital. What do you think?
Of course it would be key, and given the fact that there have still been challenges also, I think when it comes to seeing to it that financing is being addressed or met by a number of developed countries.
That's right.
And of course, I think that's what mainly had now most countries, developing countries, go back to see to it that now how do they also within their countries find ways of addressing that financing issue. And I know for countries like Uganda, there have been aspects where they have tried to share a number of contributions from different sectors, looking to see to it that they are tailored or addressing climate change. Now, of course, some of it has not really been so committed, or it has been more placed for those that have been able to, and I think also government is trying to see to it that they can find a way to raise it as a more priority, though of course there are still challenges that face us as a country. So most of that should be seen that even while there's that global commitment, there's still a need for us as a country to see to it that we can foster our own financing towards climate change.
Absolutely.
And of course now more than ever, when we collect our local taxes or resources, we need to find ways of also seeing to it that can also be channeled towards climate change.
Absolutely.
And we find ways of also addressing the issues, because currently we do not have that purely ring-fenced, at least just a particular, or if it's a percentage or at least some amount that could be channeled to climate change. But I know at least for now, there's been a lot of contributions that have been made by different sectors this financial year that we're trying to target towards climate change, and I hope by the next financial year we'll be able to also hear from government what exactly, how much that has now come to, and where exactly that will be focusing on. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think to me there should be also a relationship. You know, there should be a relationship. For example, I could give an example and say there should be a relationship between the technology mechanisms and also the financial mechanism. If there is a relationship in there, then we can get to see at least a difference in terms of financing. I think this has also maybe posed a question in my mind. We are going for COP28, but is it possible for us to point out a few areas of progress that we have made so far ever since the last COP? I mean, COP27 was last year. This is an annual event. We're now going in for COP28, but we must now point out those areas that we have made progress in. As a country, Penina, what do you think we have done so far, you know, to actually deserve to be at COP28?
Of course, as a country, there have been some positives to how we're trying to also prepare. And I know there have been some strides that have been made when it comes to developing, at least as Uganda's emphasis has been mainly on low carbon development. And that is our goal, really. And from the different ministries in charge, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Energy, Climate, even Ministry of Finance with their climate financing unit, that is a particular part where they are also trying to see to it that their strategy in place is looking at low carbon development as a country. There's also been, of course, already mentioned when it comes to the different policies now. I know for in regards to the transition, when it comes to energy, there has been also at least a review of the energy policy for Uganda to see to it that it is looking now to this broader process when it comes to transition and what they should be planning to do. I know also for a fact that the country is also planning to launch its transition plan, Uganda's transition plan during the COP. And I know that they have taken some ways of also seeing to it that they're trying to have some homegrown solutions when it comes to finding the local population to also be able to adapt to the transition. I think for the challenges that we foresee is that there's need for us to also encourage more of a unified voice before going to the COP, because we get to realize most countries, even countries internally, for as we can see, that you go with different voices towards the COP, but we need to shape that unified voice. We need to see to it that we can be able to push for an inclusive and just transition, but also to see to it that we have more stakeholders engaged in this process. And that doesn't only mean for only the ministries, but also for the local population, because most of them are going to be challenged.
And especially the private sector.
Yes, the private sector, even when it comes to the new discussion on carbon markets. I know there are regulations that are being also
I think last week we attended the national stakeholder I think carbon markets regulation meeting. I think they were having a consultation with stakeholders to see what input they could have for the regulations, so they can come up with the final copy of regulations.
Sure.
So you're right about
that stakeholder engagement needs to go so far to the carbon markets, the discussions that are happening right now, because the most vulnerable are going to be highly impacted. It won't have issues to do with if we're just speaking to ourselves, and less of that going really to what the locals especially and the vulnerable groups are going to look at or being faced with. So even to do with the different categories, the women, you know, the gender aspect of it needs to also be brought out, because unfortunately they have been also positioned in a very difficult position, being that most of them at the local or at the grassroots have had to find ways of finding ways to support their families, you know, taking different ways of providing resources in these charcoal burning, forestry and all that. So you find there is a way for us to streamline this message to also tap onto those that are at the grassroots, and also seeing to it that we need to find ways of bringing this out also in the areas of research and development. As a country, we have to focus on how we are going to put more resources towards that, because we need to also see to it that our local, at least our students in university, when they're coming up into this economy, they can be able to also understand that they are able to contribute towards at least climate change. But even the jobs that should be tailored right now are going to also be changed, because not because of our own needs, but because the global take on it is now we need to look towards.
And I think
green,
now we're going to
have
exactly. That's the word I was looking for, the green jobs.
Yeah, that is also part to do with how we are looking at now the years going ahead. That is going to be a language that is going to have to be reshaped, and a narrative that has to be rebuilt really for us, that we can be able to see to it that we are all in the country speaking to having a unified voice. We can be able to sit in the same room with a number of different stakeholders to engage around the issue of climate change, because it takes not only a government to address these issues, but even the locals need to be able to see to it that they change in their different ways of how they have been living to sustainable livelihoods and incomes.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Penina, on that. And I think where I strongly agree with you is that Ugandans must be ready. We are now transitioning into green jobs, so they must position themselves very well to ensure that they are part of, you know, the green jobs that are happening. Let's talk about our region, Penina. And of course, we know CR10 serves the region, and not only Uganda, but we want to look at the East African region and understand how climate change has affected East Africa as a region. And of course, we know that East Africa is one of the regions that is vulnerable when it comes to the rise in temperatures, when it comes to the more frequent heat waves and all these climatical conditions. I think we are still vulnerable to climate change as East Africa, and we have quite a number of, we have experienced quite a number of challenges as a region, and we of course also have to ensure that while we're at COP, we look out for the region. And of course, you get to realize that all these challenges that affect the region get to affect also our industries, our sectors. It has an effect on agriculture. It also has an effect on water resources, even human health. I think we have had quite a big challenges. So I just want us to have a breakdown on how East Africa as a region has been affected by climate change.
So exactly like what you've already mentioned, there are quite a number of areas, even when it comes to the floods and the different disasters that different countries within the region have had to go through, that still have a way of course, channeling an effect upon the rest of the other countries in the region. The issue to do with, in regards to also how we're able to manage in regards to farmers, the agriculture, food sovereignty is one of them, because you're finding challenges now when you go to the north, that there are challenges of scarcity of food, and they're finding it hard to be able to actually even grow their own food. So there's an issue to do with how we're able to also support some of those issues that are impacting, not even only in the north, but they will definitely impact, even from, I think it was last year, countries like Kenya that had issues with their different pastoralists that were crossing, looking for water
for pasture
and for for food for their animals to be able to graze. So that instead creates of course an interest to see how we can be able to manage as a region, because whatever issues we are facing right now, if we do not tend to find ways to harmonize a lot of our policies and regulations in the region, it becomes, of course, a challenge for the different people to even adopt to them. So you find they may not be aware that there is a climate crisis, but I'm sure they are also seeing the changes in the environment, even to do with the different exploitation, even when it comes to just trees or even the environment at large. You find most of them have had to find different ways of making a living, and some of that has been seen that most of them are not aware that this is actually an issue that is being faced globally.
That's true.
So the challenge with it really is adverse, and given that the fact that we need to also find a way to foster regional policies and harmonization, at least some bit of not speaking to two different things separately. We need to find a way to address the elephant in the room together as a region, but seeing to it that we can also be able to see to it that we localize and also operationalize a number of the different policies that we have, to see to it that we are not only going to look at it as a way of trying to have us more compliant to the global, to the COP discussion, but also see to it that we're able to see to it that we can strengthen a number of the different challenges impacting the locals and their livelihoods. So we need to find ways of streamlining that really as a region.
Absolutely, and I don't know if you have been part of the victims of the floods that have been happening in Kampala recently. I don't know. I mean, we're just discussing all these effects that climate change can do to us, but you have seen what has happened. Just giving an example of Kampala, I think we are having, of course, quite a number of floods that are, distracting us. But all this, of course, serves as a severe consequence for, of course, not observing any climate action. And drought, intense and unpredictable rainfall patterns, all those, I think we have had quite a number of issues at the coastal areas as well, where we have the rising sea levels. All those ones are actually some events that are actually becoming a very big challenge to actually combat with. But what are those specific, I think when it comes to the region, we have different initiatives. What 2-3 initiatives do you think we could actually put in place that can actually be even emerged in our NDC, but to help address these challenges of floods, drought, for example? Because now, is it about the drainage system really penning up? I don't know. Isn't that something the government can do to definitely, combat a challenge like this?
Of course, there are a number of ways that and issues that are coming out from this. The challenge that we see right now, when you mention floods, if it's a drainage issue, but also if it's also on the way we are also managing within as a country and also at the center, that we are failing to be able to address these things that look a bit small, but in actual sense they create a big impact on even how people are able to do business. You know, in the private sector, they cannot gain from such a season because either it has had to have challenges on how fast they're able to transport their goods, or how fast they're able to actually even have a proper market for them, because now you're looking at finding ways of running away from floods or running from particular areas that are not going to be conducive for them. So having an enabling environment for most of the different stakeholders, it should be part of the key aspects. And for private sector, really it shouldn't be compromised, because these are fundamental categories of the stakeholders that we need to see to it that we can have them still be able to take on opportunities, be competitive in the region, but also see to it that these areas of climate change do not impact them. When it comes to those that are trading, even in food, finding ways of being able to actually even make most of that percentage of exporting, they are not being able to do so right now because they are facing challenges with how well they are able to utilize this season. And of course that impacts us heavily, but given the fact that we need to find ways of shaping the environment really to suit them, but also shaping a number of our policies to find ways to give them at least some kind of bounce back, or at least some way of supporting them when it comes to credit, financing. How best can we support them to be able to also strengthen those issues that from a side of it just coming out from floods can really impact them in how they're doing their business. So, or what they're able to reap out of their business. There's a way we need to find a way to harmonize that in our policies. Also the issue to do with ensuring that those that have, especially the farmers, when it comes to their rights, there's a need to see to it that we can be able to speak to them and center the discussion to them as well. Because over time you get to realize we are having challenges in supporting them as well, to taking in their challenges that they're facing given the climate change crisis. But also we know that trade right now is coming back at the center of most of these discussions. Development-wise, they need to see to it that trade should not be should not be challenged by a number of these climate change issues, but should instead be used as a way to foster a number of the different opportunities that we can gain from actually, if we're properly prepared as a country to address most of these climate issues. And also the different links that you had mentioned when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to gender, when it comes to energy, there's a need for us to now look at these areas to see to it that how well best are we prepared to see to it that we can address them in time for us not to get into a problem or a crisis, but in time for us to ensure that we're utilizing every opportunity and investment that is happening in the country. So in case there are different investments or agreements that are being agreed on, there's a way for us to highly take on the technology development aspect, build onto our technology, but also support by having capacity building, really be streamlined also in a number of different engagements that government is taking on, that they can build capacity of these farmers, build capacity of the different private sector, build capacity in seeing to it that they're able to be prepared even for them in regards to the change, climate change, but also the transition, and also see to it that we can be able to have more support to them, as I mentioned, on credit, or the credit that they're able to access to strengthen their businesses. So trade, as for us as CIATIMI, we believe that trade is really, should be more brought into the center of most of these discussions now, especially given the fact that also other countries are looking to revive most of their economic growth, but also build onto sustainable development. Trade can be able to contribute to a number of these different discussions, but of course strategically to see to it that while we're looking at enhancing our productivity or competitiveness, we're building onto our industries to also have that opportunity, and also our investment, what we're investing in, or what foreign investors are investing in our country. How can it be put in a way to channel more of technology development and transfer, as opposed to leaving us with only less of what we should have bargained for.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And of course, you mentioned how trade must be or should be a part of these conversations. And to myself, I was thinking, are there some sustainable trade practices that contribute to climate goals?
Of course, there are quite a number, and some that I've just mentioned.
Yeah.
In areas to do with investment agreements, there's a way that can be streamlined, that if someone is coming to do business in Uganda, they should be knowing that their contribution to climate change is important, that they should not override development or for, in underlooking the lives of the people. In case, you've seen factories being built in wetlands, and the challenges that it imposes on water sources, those that have had poor management of their drainages, just because they're trying to find a way of doing business, but it's going to heavily impact on the lives of those communities, those people who are in the community, because they're not trying to look and see how to hold this investor to account, or to be able to also have them improve the lives of those around in the community. So there's a need for that. So we can find ways of having those investment agreements speak to the people also, to also address their issues. Also in regards to when it comes to the different opportunities when it comes to doing business across the borders, there's a way that can be able to see to it that while we grow, we need to also factor in the chances that countries are also being competitive, and also there have been a number of trade barriers that have been put across that we have had challenges dealing with, but we need to see to it that the private sector is put in a position that can be able to be competitive, but also gain from a number of the opportunities that are out there. And it can only be made so if they also capitalize on the information that they get, but also build into their production and manufacturing. That can go a long way into seeing to it that we have more local resources generated within, and less having to be contributed by different multilateral actors or different creditors that give the country a lot of money. So we need to see to it that we're not being indebted, and yet we could actually have more resources generated through a number of trade options and sustainable ways of doing business. And
because actually this is a very good input, Penny. I appreciate that, but I'm trying to find out, are there any challenges and any opportunities that you could think of challenges and opportunities that that affect NGOs in promoting sustainable development, especially, of course, when it comes to climate action? Are there any challenges that affect NGOs, because they should be at the forefront? That's one. And maybe you can use the same opportunity to discuss with us on CIATIN's involvement in climate policy advocacy. What are those things that CIATIN is doing to ensure that they address climate issues, and that can be combined with also the opportunities and challenges that affect NGOs, and of course when it comes to promoting sustainable development?
Of course, for CIATIN Uganda, there are a number of different areas we engage on when it comes to trade, investment, and other fiscal related policies and processes, tax, debt. So climate and also in regards to climate change, given the fact that we have had a number of engagements, we have built networks and alliances of different civil society organizations to champion a number of issues in regards to not only climate change, but also in regards to trade and investment. We have found ways of building capacity of stakeholders, because even while government is trying to reach to those that they are able to find, to engage with, we have found ways of trying to push the message also across to a number of different stakeholders, be it from the academia to the different civil society organizations. We need to find ways of also pushing to the private sector to understand that this is what we are trying to look at as a country going forward in regards to climate change policies, but also the strategies that are being having to be realigned to meet the transition agenda. But also we see that most of this has been an issue when it comes to capacity building. So as Siatini, we have taken that as an effort to see to it that we're able to have more stakeholders build their capacity around these issues, but also the engagement that we have had with a number of different government institutions to see to it that they're able to also take into account civil society voice and actions, that we can be able to also see to it that we are not just stakeholders but also key players in this discussion. And definitely if we're not able to build onto having more alliances or networks, trying to also take into consideration most of these discussions around climate change, you'll get to find that government is going at it alone. And yet there is a way for us to be able to be all brought into the discussion without having to only look at those that are more crucial, because everyone is going to be heavily impacted by climate change issues. When it comes to the discussion also on how we are able to have more research done, we have championed a number of different policy papers and briefs and researches in regards to the transition, in regards to how climate change and trade are also a nexus, how that nexus can be built on, given the fact that we are seeing more and more countries are coming in with different avenues of fostering this transition, but also climate change issues. We have seen to it that we can use this research to build onto our advocacy, but also see to it that we are also championing a number of the different recommendations that we want to see take shape, even for being partners in the different climate change, climate action networks, environment and natural resources networks. We are part of those similar CSOs that are trying to build onto the discussions going into the COP28.
That's true.
So we have, of course, been part of those discussions even before, and seeing to it that we are utilizing every opportunity to see to it that we can be able to seek government and address government on the different recommendations, what we want as civil society, but building onto how we can be able to mitigate, adapt, towards the climate change, but also see to it that the transition is inclusive and equitable for a number of different reasons. So we have found ways of course, championing these issues before government, and we are sure that before they go, and also now that they are being able to take on some of these proposals during the COP, it's going to fit into some of those, the main agenda for representatives from government who will be part of the
negotiations. That's absolutely correct, and I think to me we cannot wait for the outcomes, can you?
I'm also expecting so much, so I hope for the best.
All right, so I think we have a number of strategies that we should actually put in place to increase advocacy. I'm glad that Siatine is also doing quite a number of activities to ensure that they increase their climate policy advocacy. But I think to me, as a nation, as a country, we should aim to increase public awareness about climate change. And I think one of the ways that the country can do this is through developing educational programs in schools. Last week we had a young climate march, young children in schools, I think from P1 to something, were marching, I think, on the streets of Kampala for climate justice. But I think the development of educational programs in schools, and of course not only even schools but community centers, to teach people about the science behind climate change is very important, because up to now I can tell you this, there are some people who still don't know that we are in an era that is being affected by climate change and its impacts, of course. So I think, to me, educational programs, either climate change should be part of the curriculum, I think that should be something that we could collaborate with educators to incorporate climate change topics, you know, into the curriculum. I think, and if they do that, then now students easily understand, you know, that the issues, all these terminologies, obviously, the issues concerned to do with transition and the rest. Then, if we talk about the utilization of media platforms, for example, what we are doing right now is a way of advocating. I think it's another strategy that we can use. And of course, this will include televisions, the radio, newspapers, online platforms. But the importance here would be to disseminate information about climate change. And then we also need to look at how best can we create a compelling and easily understandable message that resonates with what the audience wants to listen. Sometimes we are speaking complicated terms that people don't understand. You know, if we go to a certain meeting and start talking about emission, carbon markets and the rest, people are going to get confused. So I think we need to start having clear messages that help people to understand what climate change is all about. And I think even before we go to COP28, we need to leverage our social media platforms to ensure that we also, you know, reach a wider audience quickly to understand what climate change is all about. So I think, to me, there are quite a number of strategies that we could use. I don't know if you're going to supplement on the strategies, but I think engaging local communities in discussions like this, engaging young people in discussions like this, because they're the future. Even, I mean, we were with national negotiators, and they are old people. But after that, they're going to transit, and there's going to be new negotiators coming in, and these are young people. So I think we need to invest and channel our energy into making sure that the young people understand what happens at negotiation and what are those negotiation skills and tactics that you need to ensure that your country gets what it wants in terms of investment, in terms of technology transfer, and the rest. So I think there are quite a number of strategies that we should do. I don't know if there are some that you're going to supplement on what I have said, but I think there's quite a number of them. But organizing events, organizing workshops, organizing seminars to involve people directly into this conversation should be key for the government of Uganda, and should be key for everyone else out there. They should be involved directly to these conversations.
True.
Yeah.
True,
I don't know if you have any other to tell me about, any other strategy that maybe I could have missed out.
Of course, not taking into account the policies that we have. To speak also to those categories of people. Reshaping how we look at some of these policies, and some of them have been instead received by the public as maybe not of interest to them. So you find even them having a say or a take on how these policies are being formulated, the decision making around it, you know, what can be able to see to it that they also know that they need to be involved and get involved only when these policies also accept them and allow them to be involved.
That's true.
And also around the different discussions in building awareness is by also seeing to it that we can be able to instead also, you know, capture the voices of those that are heavily impacted in a number of these discussions. Because by hearing them have or share their issues, it kind of also places a better way of trying to also see to it that they get addressed. So as CSOs or as different actors there's need to see that we capture the voices of those being heavily impacted.
That's true.
What this climate change means to them, and what would they be able to have to understand, or what would they have to do to take into account that this can actually be a way for them to be involved. And of course, the way that we also need to understand the different investment policies that are there, what it takes for them to be able to be, you know, realigned to seeing to it that they're also taking into account the different issues when it comes to technology transfer, and how that easily computes into solving an issue. Because if we're not able to hold an investor liable to even trying to see to it that the jobs that are secured for Ugandans are also at the top, they're not looking at just casual workers, or building onto capacity and, you know, transferring that technology onto a team or people that are very well capable of doing it as Ugandans.
That's true.
There's need to have those policies, especially investment policies, have them streamlined to have ways of addressing that as an issue, because you'll find that goes a long way to even how we're able to mitigate some of these climate change issues, because we shall be building homegrown solutions by having technology development for ourselves as a country, but also having even trainers of trainees or people who are very well conversant of what they need to do to ensure that they're able to have their own ways of addressing an issue with a solution. And that can only come from how we have our policies really at the forefront mainly. And of course more of also what you've also shared, building capacity and awareness is key.
All right, so as we come to the close of our first segment for the COP28 and climate action discussion, for those that have been watching us, we are trying to unfold for you what COP28 means and what it's going to mean for different countries that will be participating at COP28 in Expo City in Dubai, UAE. So for those that will be attending, of course, we wish you a very safe journey, but at the same time, we want to say that during this discussion series, we are going to take you through a number of events that are going to happen at COP. We have a number of side events that even Uganda itself is planning to organize while at COP. And we have different expectations while at COP, and of course we have different outcomes that we hope to achieve while at COP. So I think to me there is quite a lot that we are going to unfold for you as you continue to listen in at our COP28 discussion series. We have quite a number of areas that we want to unfold for you to be able to understand these climate change conversations. But as we have discussed today, it is important for you to be a part of climate change events, climate change seminars, climate change workshops, for you to continue to be a part of these conversations and understand these languages so that we can know how to combat climate change crisis together as a family and as a country. And as we conclude our first day of the COP28 discussion series, we're going to finalize by just looking at the expected outcomes of COP28, and we can, I think, take it at that. And we mentioned something concerning climate mitigation commitments, yes? And I think there you actually mentioned that the commitment there will be to reduce greenhouse gases or greenhouse gas emissions. And I think to me, nationally determined contributions will be actually aligning their targets with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So I think to me, while we're at COP28, people, I think different nations will want to hear how countries have been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time on how they have been able to align their indices with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Any other expectation?
Because the global stocktake and what it will unfold from the report that they'll be sharing. And also taking into account that from the last COP there was the need to have an enhanced transparency framework, which ideally would be showing where countries are now trying to finance most of their resources towards climate change. So that was one that is also important, that we need to see to it that we are also trying to find ways of being transparent in our financing, and also that coming out that there should be areas that government is looking at towards supporting climate change areas and issues in adaptation and mitigation, but also under mitigation, as you mentioned, on the greenhouse gas emissions, they're also going to have a number of discussions on the transition and what exactly and how the progress is so far. So there is need for us to see how to take interest into that, because it will shape a lot of the different discussions going forward, and a number of countries are utilizing that to also see to it that they are ready and prepared. So as Uganda, we need to be prepared to see to it that we can find ways of fostering a number of different ways in either opportunities, either ways of mitigating some of the challenges that we foresee, but mainly in seeing to it that during this process in the road to COP, we're also finding ways of finalizing ways to addressing most of the challenges before. Most of those that will be discussed in the COP will be mostly taken on Yeah, so there's a lot to look out for as an outcome from the COP.
Of course, we have also talked about the issue of technology transfer, where we mentioned that facilitating technology transfer, especially to the least developed countries, because we want to see this technology come from the global north to the global south. We want this transfer to happen, and of course, that will be another outcome that we shall be looking forward to. So I think the transfer of technology to developing countries is a key aspect of global climate action, and I think that will be something that we can also combine with adaptation and resilience, where of course, COP will also arrange a platform for agreements on supporting vulnerable communities, ecosystems, and also countries to adapt to the impacts, because the adaptation is always to the impact. The impact is always very, very big, and want to see how best can we adapt to the impacts of climate change. But of course, loss and damage cannot be left out of the picture. Discussions on loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change will basically be something that will be very, very largely, I think even a fund towards loss and damage will be also another elephant in the room during the COP28 discussion. And I think something also to do with nature-based solutions. I think to me the NBS is something that is very much key when it comes to these conversations, things to deal with reforestation, things to do with afforestation, things to do with sustainable land management. I think to me all those nature-based solutions are issues that could be also aligned towards the Paris Agreement, but at the same time also the NDC. Of course, we shall look at the civil society engagement. I think it will, during these discussions, we shall also look at the civil society. What do they say about these expectations for increased engagement and also the collaboration between the governments and also the non-state actors. But I think to me this meeting at COP28, the CS will also look at those other stakeholders. How best can they have them involved in the discussion? And lastly, I think to me another area that will be well tackled will be the global climate governance. And I think they want to look at how best can they have the future of global climate governance included in the role of international institutions. Because when we say international institutions, for example, the GIZ, UNDP and the rest, international institutions that can push the agenda. So they want to look at that global climate governance that can actually be pushed by international institutions, but also the nations at a different perspective. So I think to me, those are some of the expected outcomes for COP28. I do not know what outcome you're going to come with, you're going to bring to Uganda as a participant, considering you're going to be a participant for this one. Of course, personally, I want to say safe journey, and we might even find ourselves there. You never know. Yeah, but of course, this has been a very, very intriguing discussion, Penina, and I think to me it is vital for us to open doors and windows to our audience to know what COP28 is all about, but also to understand the key negotiations and discussions that normally happen on the inside. And of course, this is to cater for those who will not have the opportunity to be there in Dubai. And I think that's why we cannot thank enough for this opportunity and also for being a part of this. Yes. So for those who are watching us, and of course, Uganda particularly is vulnerable. For those who are watching, you have to know that Uganda is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and therefore COP28 is going to present to us an opportunity for us to collect our voice together and ensure that we have sustainable solutions that can help us to advance with the impacts of climate change. And of course, we need to address these issues, of course, at a unity level, because we know that climate justice, climate adaptation, and also all these thematic areas cannot happen without all these efforts coming together. So I think we have to, first of all, thank Uganda and the government of Uganda to always ensure that we are part of these COP28 discussions and negotiations at a global level. And we also want to thank, of course, other stakeholders at the private levels and also the public levels to ensure that we have a word, we have a voice as Uganda to be a part of COP. And of course, we cannot also thank you enough for, of course, being a part of Smart 24 TV and also being a part of this discussion series. Thank you so much for continuing to be with us. We shall be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. to ensure that we give you more details on what it means to be a part of the 28th Conference of Parties happening in Expo City at Dubai. Thank you so much. I remain Oyster Clinton. Bye-bye.
Smart 24, driving business. Smart 24, driving business.
This is Jordan. When it comes to classwork, Jordan is magic. Jordan shines. Jordan makes his peers better. Jordan is a true leader. White Star Magic family. Be a leader. Be magic.
Era tutukanga tukoba omuntu nti nigasita ndala mukaaga itaano sita isatu ash onige yes
nga bakubuuza amachanti
nga bamubuuza amachanti code nga tumukoba ata mu nsanvu emirundi olumalirizawo ng'atamwe sente dali kuwayo kumbaga ya mwenemu saawa yeneyo nga kyabazinga amwebaza nga tweyongereyo kayi tujja mu kyalo ekindi
ekikoba embaga olunawa luti nga mwira
tulija kumala kayi tweyongere emyezi mukaaga